I want to talk a little bit about the history of Oyata Lineage weapons kata. I frequently get asked, particularly now that I'm traveling all over the place doing things, why my version of Jo Kihon, Jo Jisen, Bo Kihon, whatever weapons kata, why it looks different from what somebody else is doing or what somebody else has seen online. And essentially, the way kind of the history of everything happened is Taika Oyata, after World War II, 1945, he really started his big martial arts journey. He trained with Uegushiku Wakanaguri. He got various weapons kata from both of them. And then after both of those guys died, they were in their 90s when World War II ended. After they died, he sought training elsewhere, and he learned a large volume of weapons kata. Not all of those kata were really using the same kind of philosophies that Uegushiku and Wakanaguri had given him, the principles they had given him. But he learned a whole lot, and not all of those transferred over to the United States when he immigrated in 1977. When he immigrated to the United States, he started doing all these different seminars and demos, and initially he really just kind of crammed a lot of information out there. He pushed out a whole lot of kata, a whole lot of different weapons kata, and he had to get that information out there quickly. And so all of these weapons kata were disseminated to different people initially. And what that gradually turned into was the quick versions that he gave people. He then started kind of honing in on certain people in the association that part of it was logistics of who was close enough to him that he could give them refined training to get them to do a particular kata the way he wanted it kind of disseminated at the time. Tall Oaks was a summer conference location or summer camp location. It was an outdoor area. There was a large building that had a cafeteria in it, and there were some barrack type buildings with bunkhouses with bunks that people would stay in, and we would train outdoors. So we would go out and get under some trees, tall oaks of course, and Taika had refined a little bit of kata here and there with different people and picked them, and a lot of them were from Kansas City, not because Kansas City was the haven for the best martial arts in the world by any means. It was just logistics. He lived in the greater Kansas City area there, and he could take somebody and refine them a little bit and send them out to start teaching. So you would go to Tall Oaks, for example. My original Ruku Kempo instructor, Shion Mike Waddell, knew, I believe, Kanishi no Sai, Suji no Kun Bo, and Chiziku Bo. Those were the three weapons kata he had learned when he converted from Shito-ryu to Ruku Kempo at the time. And that's all he knew. So if you came up under him and wanted to learn a Jo kata, you had to go to Tall Oaks to do so. So a whole bunch of people would go out there to the camp. You would stay. It'd be 3 days. Taika would be busy in the basement of the cafeteria, bringing in people that were testing for various Udansha ranks, whether it was the Shodan, Nidan, or Godan. And whatever rank, you were going to go test in front of him. So at these camps, you would go there and you would take the weapon you wanted to learn. I wanted to learn Jo Kihon, so probably around 1990 I showed up with whatever Jo that I bought, and there was a guy right there next to the cafeteria building that was teaching Jo. A little concrete pad there, and we all learned Jo Kihon. Some other people back in front of that building were learning Bo. Some others learning Sai, Manji Sai, Nute Bo, whatever you can imagine. So different people teaching those weapons, and you would learn that weapon. And so pretty much the 1980s and probably first half or so of the 1990s, that was kind of the case. Everyone would go to the camp, you would learn or refine a weapon. Maybe I learned Joe kihon this year, and next year I wanted to make sure I hadn't strayed from the path, I hadn't drifted. So I'd go back to that same guy and maybe get fixed up a little bit. And then if I got the seal of approval, then go try to learn bow kihon or something that I didn't know. So that was kind of the mix. 80s, first part of the 90s or so, that's kind of how things work. And then at some point, we switched from using tall oaks, the outdoor deal, to using a hotel where we still did some outdoor training. All the long weapons went outside, but the indoor weapons, or the smaller weapons, people pretty much did indoors, whether it was in a hallway or one of the breakout rooms. And so it's kind of still the same thing applied. And as time went on, you know, you'd have the guy that was leading everybody in Joe, he drifted off at some point. He had family stuff he had to do, so he quit training. And somebody else stepped up. And again, Taika, logistic-wise, usually picked somebody from the Kansas City metro area just because they were close, and he could dial them up and go, okay, that's okay to teach, you're good to go. And they would start teaching. During those time periods, there weren't a lot of major changes. There were some things people would call, again, I preached a little bit about how Taika ended up not liking the terms basic, intermediate, advanced, but there were basic versions, intermediate, and advanced versions of kata. Well, during that time period, a lot of people, like me, I would learn Joe kihon from somebody at the camp and then go back to my dojo. Nobody else at my dojo knew Joe kihon, or at least not the instructors. So I didn't have somebody to constantly notice if I was going off at a 45 when I came back to camp, and then a few weeks in I had somehow messed up and started going off at 90 degrees instead of 45 or whatever. So drift happened, right? A lot of drift happened in that time period. Now if you were training at headquarters, you might accidentally be doing Joe kihon when Taika walked in the door, hint hint. A lot of us would do some sort of weapons kata, and then Taika would walk in the door at headquarters, see what we were doing, and he might give you, throw you a little nugget here, a little flake here and there, and fix up something. But if he had a mission, like we're going to work on spiderweb today, then he'd be like, weapons down, and everybody'd set their weapons down, and you'd go off into that. All right, so that's initially how things worked. You came in, you learned a kata at camp from somebody that had got some tutelage from Taika, and then really after 2000, in the year 2000, Taika had to have a surgery. There was a problem. He actually thought he was going to die. There were some cancer cells in there. He thought he was going to die, and he kind of had this moment where he decided, I'm going to start teaching more reality-based, more life protection, less sport stuff, less hoo-ha, wild, wacky stuff with the weapons, and more practical stuff with the weapons. So he had a major change, and what I say is, like, every kata that was out there, like Joe kihon for instance, became kind of a box. And so he would come to class, and some of us would be working on Joe or Bo or something, and he'd see and he'd start putting things in that box, principles that he got from Wakanaguri or Uegusku, or that he had developed in the decades of training. One very common thing I'll kind of demonstrate a change in was in Joe kihon, the original version. You do your regular bow, and I kind of messed up there and did it in a more modern fashion, but originally we would come straight up on the right side in our little kamai or gamai, our little starting position, right? And it was very kind of formal. Well, what Taika said is, you're not covering your groin. So that's kind of a wasted motion. Why, it doesn't have meaning. So he wanted to fix it. So our Joe Kihon box, he decided, boom, I'm going to drop in groin cover. So that turned into, initially, our feet stayed apart and we started coming to the groin and pulling up. And then he's like, no. Don't do that with your hands. Cover your groin with your feet. And we're all looking puzzled. What's he talking about? Well, what he meant is what turned into Ka-Han-Shin, Jo-Han-Shin principle later on. Upper body controls lower body, lower controls upper. So he took Ka-Han-Shin, Jo-Han-Shin and threw it in the box. So what he wanted was, if my foot closes, my arm will follow. And so I'm still force efficient. Oh, force efficient, throw that in the box, right? This is still force efficient. I'm just closing and then pulling up, and then my foot comes out and I launch forward before I do this position. So this is kind of there, but it changed. There it is, just for a split second. He didn't want us to stop here. He wanted us to do this, right? So we did that for a little bit, and then he says, why aren't you covering your face? It's like, well, because we can't think for ourselves, Taika. We got to be spoon-fed. So again, he cover your face, goes in the box. So we covered our face, covered our groin, and essentially you're doing a double block, right? You're doing a double. I'm covering my face, I'm covering my groin, and thereby my arms are in between and the stick is in between. I'm covering my entire body. So Ka-Han-Shin, Jo-Han-Shin, force efficiency, cover your groin, cover your face. All those things are now in this box, and I come out. All right. Economy of motion. So instead of just coming here, he grabbed economy of motion, threw it in the box. And what I mean by that is the back end of the Joe is going forward. So I cover, come here, and I pop it. Instead of just coming back and thinking of this hand, I'm getting a little pop out there before I come here and then come into that position. So all these things were very, very gradual as we did them. Some of these principles that he threw in our Joe Kihon box were years apart that we heard them. All right, so all of that happens. Now he started saying, stop thinking about the front hand, start thinking about the back hand. Stop thinking about hitting somebody and start thinking about grappling with somebody with a weapon. And this was a big change for me with Joe, even Bo to an extent, but really with Tanbo. He spent several years fixing up all the kata and adding a kata to the system that was related to Tanbo, where everything was the pinky end of the backhand, and it was more about grappling than the standard hit somebody, hit somebody. It was capture somebody, capture somebody. So again, just put that in the box. I'm here, I come up and over. Now this end is actually latching on and pulling rather than just swinging the top down. All right, so I'm here, come out, get my jab in, slide, boom. And so I'm pulling somebody back, I'm pulling their arm and probably their stick in the technique that Taika gave me and others for that. But real important, I'm pulling and then striking the neck rather than just deflecting, strike the neck. I'm coming up, setting, pulling, and pulling them into me. So those kind of things went into the Joe Kihon box. Now, another big thing for me that helped put power and what I kind of call the curveball mentality, right? So instead of the stick being straight linear, it kind of curves as you go to strike and block, etc., etc. The original version of this kata was, if this is the center of my web, I would step out, return to center, step out, return to center, step out, those kind of motions. You see a lot of people are still doing those versions. That was kind of a later thing that Taika did add that just didn't filter out to everybody. So if this spot right here is my center, like I would step out, back, out, back, out. And I'd always return to center and then go out. Well, Taika said, I need to start putting in some more of my body and putting all 145 pounds into my strike and also throw curveballs. So there's the three-dimensional attack thrown into the Joe Kihon box, as well as what we call switch foot, right? And switch foot is if this is center, one foot goes back, one goes forward, one goes back, one goes forward, and instead of landing with my back foot in the center of the web, I am landing with my spine essentially in the center. So what that looks like is, well, here is the way I originally learned, is back foot in the center, back foot to center. What we later came to do was I opened, came back, and landed, and my spine is in the center. 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 And so it forces you to do hands before feet. Hands before feet in the box. It forces you to do hands before feet. That puts more of your body weight into a strike or a pull, a capture, and all those things went into the box. So we started doing it that way. Now we're doing it that way, and then Taika starts saying, hey, I told you a year ago, 2 years ago to cover your face. You're not doing it. Well, we're like, yeah, we are. Yeah, we're covering our face. He goes, yeah, you're only covering your face in one spot. So if I am here, and then my next move is here, that would probably mean that the opponent is somewhere in that general vicinity, right? So Taika would say, you might as well just stick your chin out here because you're not covering your body. So now our switch steps turned into cover the face of the direction we're going, right? I'm covering the face of the direction I'm going, covering the face, right? And there were some earlier versions that people called Advanced Joe, where there were some extra high flourishes and stuff. This is something a little bit different. I can see maybe those flourishes that were high, where someone came down and then did some other high motions up there. I've seen several variations of that. I was never actually taught that, so I'm not comfortable kind of showing that, but I can see that possibly being why certain people did those, quote, advanced Joe Kihon versions with those motions. But at any rate, he's like, I told you to cover your face 2 years ago, you're only covering it in one spot, cover it in the rest of the spots. So every time, oh, I'm going to go this way now, I'm going to cover the face. I'm going to go this way, I'm going to cover the face. Very, very logical thing to do, but of course none of us thought of it. Taika Oyata made us put that into our box. Now, another thing that comes up quite frequently is this hand position. There are several times in the original version I learned probably in 1990 or so at Tall Oaks, there was a version where you did a few of these little kind of down strikes. You'd come here and go into this crane position, done at least 3 times in Joe Kihon, depending on all the variables that you were taught over the years. Now, Lisa Ohms went to Okinawa with Taika on a trip, and she went to Shiredo, big martial arts equipment store there on Okinawa, and she picked up a Joe and was just kind of feeling it, trying to figure out if she might want to buy it. So she starts going through Joe Kihon, and she got to a portion of the kata where you had the reverse grip, and Taika was standing there with her, and he saw her do that, and he's like, "Why are you doing that?" She's like, "That's the way I was taught. It's the way I was taught." And most people I know that learned it, particularly at Tall Oaks, were the early years at the hotel in the 80s, 90s. That's what we learned. We all learned that reverse grip on that. And Taika told her that hand position is for the drawback sweep crane stance portion. The down strike should be this way, all right? That ruffled a lot of feathers later on when people came back from Okinawa and told that story. But at any rate, he said, this makes a weak shoulder and a weak wrist. It's almost like you're doing tuite to yourself, all right? So weak shoulder, weak wrist on a strike, it's just logistics. What you're trying to do is not going to work out well for you. So if somebody's holding their bow Joe this way and I come down this way and then try to hook and pull, the hook and pull, that motion, if I'm doing a hook and pull or a shoulder lock and pull, it makes sense for a pulling motion but not a down strike motion. So Taika told Lisa to change it to this, that when her and Taika came back to the United States, the very first Tuesday at Taika's dojo, Lisa brought it up. And so all of us were sitting there talking about it, and walks Taika. Taika joins the conversation and repeats everything Lisa had just told us, that we should be here on impact, and then our changes to the hand can happen depending on the technique that we're doing at the time. So again, those are just a few examples of body alignment thrown in the box, force efficiency, economy of motion, all of these different principles that Taika either got from Uegashikudo Wakanaguri or developed on his own over the course of the decades he was training in the art. All of these things would gradually, over the course of months, years, maybe even decades for some, go into your Joe Kihon box. Even if you were the guy that taught Joe Kihon back in 1990, right? If you quit training and didn't train for 20 years, you missed Taika shoving stuff in the box for 20 years. So if you're Joe Kihon, even if you were the most proficient person in 1992 or 1993 when you quit, even being the most proficient person there, you may still be a better practitioner, but you didn't get the changes, right? So your kata, I'm not saying your kata is worse, I'm saying it's different. It's gonna be different. And that's one reason that so many people see versions and they're like, you're doing that way different. Well, I got the versions all the way up until Taika died, or at least most of the versions, I guess I would say. I will say this, being in Kansas City, I got to see Taika every week, but Taika would fly to New Jersey and do a seminar. And in that seminar, he might see somebody in the corner working Joe Kihon when he walked in, and he might walk over and tell him, do this, change this. I wouldn't get it in Kansas City. Nobody in Kansas City would get it. The guy in New Jersey got it. The guy in Fargo at the next seminar might get it. That's the way he worked. He went to these different seminars and he'd see somebody doing something and he would give them a little piece of gold dust, a little gold nugget here and there. So the version that I do is the most current version that Lee Richards was given. That's it, right? It's not the best version in the world. It's not not every single change that Taika ever came up with. It's not every single principle that Taika ever put in a Joe Kihon box. It's what Lee got. That's what I'm teaching, what Lee got. So if you missed 10 years, or you were just didn't get as many things because maybe you could only attend one seminar a year or 2 seminars a year, and I got to see him 4 times a week, that's just the nature of the way he taught. He didn't put out, here is Joe Kihon 1.0 video, although there is a video of Joe Kihon where Taika's sitting in the background, but he didn't come out with Joe Kihon 2.0 and Joe Kihon 3.0 and distribute those when he did changes. If you knew somebody that got a change and you were training with them and you saw the change, then you would ask about it, which is my recommendation. If you see somebody that is doing Joe Kihon different than your version of Joe Kihon, or Nute Bo different than the version you're doing of Nute Bo, ask them, okay, where did you learn that? Oh, I learned it from Jim Lowe. Okay, now you know kind of the lineage. Regrettably, Jim's gone, as well as Taika, so you can't, chase that lineage, but you can kind of reverse engineer. Okay, maybe Jim's doing this motion in a kata, and you don't do that motion. Well, why would he go over? Why is that there? I can tell you there's a Bo kata where originally everybody was taught to go over the back of the wrist, and more people were messing it up than Taika had patience with, and so he took that out. So going and trying to track down why they're doing it, if the people are still alive that you can track that lineage back up to Taika, you might be able to find that information. But even if that's not the case, people like Jim Logue are dead, so you can't ask Jim. Maybe one of Jim's students got the why it changed. Or if they didn't, then maybe the two of you, the person who's doing it that way and your way, can sit there and play with it and try to come up, well, why would we change that? Why would we go from here to here? All right, what benefit does one have over the other? Not saying this one's right and this one's wrong. There's differences, and there should be a reason for that, and that is study. If you start studying those changes, you'll grow as a martial artist.